Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells. I am the host of this show. I'm also the founder of the Feely Human Collective, where we grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional curiosity. And in fact, this very upcoming Sunday, June 19th, we are doing an Illustrating Empathy workshop online. It's $25 to join. It's something I've done before, and it's deeply wonderful and beautiful. And if you haven't joined one of our empathy workshops, I highly recommend it. So if you want to go check that out, go to illustratingempathy.com or just go to feelyhuman.co. Click on the link at the top there, and I'll take you there. Hope to see you there. This is episode 228 on grief, love, and dispelling darkness with Kathryn Schulz. Kathryn is a staff writer at The New Yorker. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer of The Really Big One, a story about an earthquake that will destroy a sizable portion of the coastal Northwest. Terrifying piece of writing, beautiful piece of writing that was written in 2015. We mostly talked about grief and love and Kathryn's new memoir, Lost and Found, which is just a stunning piece of writing. I compared it to Truman Capote's first book, just meaning that Capote's first book is something for me that was like every sentence was a little morsel that I wanted to take home with me and just give a little hug to. It was just so meaningful to me, so beautiful and rich. And Kathryn is just one amazing writer, and I really enjoyed chatting with her about grief and love, losing her father, finding her love in sea, having a baby, dispelling darkness, this book being as intimate a thing as she's ever written. We also talked about being runners. We talked about why comparative suffering is not useful. We talked about Everything Everywhere All at Once, the movie I keep talking about because it's the best. We talked about so many things. Really, really loved this conversation. I hope you do as well. I hope you also go out and pick up Kathryn's new book, Lost and Found. It's really wonderful. If you have a local independent bookstore, please purchase it there, or bookshop.org is a great resource. Just your local bookstore. Get it there. It's great. Please. Lost and Found by Kathryn Schulz. That's Schulz. And before we get to the episode, I guess a reminder that, again, this coming Sunday, I'm leading a workshop. It's called Illustrating Empathy. If you go to feelyhuman.co, click on the Workshops tab, click on Illustrating Empathy. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific time. It's $25 to join. It's about 2 hours usually, so 10 to 12 Pacific time. It's a really wonderful time. I promise you that it's wonderful, and I hope you can join. So plenty of tickets left. Hope you can join that. The other thing I wanted to mention, two more things. One being that just tomorrow or Wednesday this week, the next episode of Movies That Make Us Feel will launch with, or will be released. This one with my guest, Jess Springle, on Harriet the Spy. That's right, Harriet the Spy, the movie from the 90s. Movies That Make Us Feel is a new spin-off podcast I'm doing only on Patreon. So it's $5 a month to join that. It's a way to support this show, this podcast, me, the work I do with Feely Human. It's $5 a month. You get a bonus podcast called Movies That Make Us Feel, where a guest and I talk about movies that make us feel. And this month, we're talking about Harriet the Spy. That comes out in a couple of days. Hope you can join us. Again, $5 a month. It's patreon.com/feelyhuman to join that. And the last thing I'll say is, if you go to Storied Hats, so as you know, I like to wear hats. I sometimes wear hats. I like hats. Hats are fun. And Storied Hats, STORIED, storiedhats.com is a hat I like a lot. They make hats from very sustainable materials, recycled materials. They set me up with a coupon code for all of you Feely humans. So if you use the code Feely, Feely, that's Feely, you get 10% off. So if you go to storiedhats.com, use the code Feely at checkout, you get 10% off, and I get a kickback. So that's an affiliate link. Full disclosure, that's an affiliate link. Never had one of those before. This is like the first experiment in doing this, which is kind of fun and exciting. So if you like hats and if you like supporting a small business like storiedhats.com, if you like, sustainable materials, check out storiedhats.com, use the code Feely, get 10% off. Great. Awesome. I'll make sure to include that link in the show notes. And that's it. That's the pitch. That's the intro to this episode. Hope you enjoy it. 228 on Grief, Love, and Dispelling Darkness with Kathryn Schulz.
La la la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans, trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight, so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm feeling all the feelings simultaneously because I'm human, gosh darn it, and that's just who we are. Anyways, I'm feeling all of these things because I'm here with Pulitzer Prize winner, staff writer at The New Yorker, and author of the new memoir, Lost and Found. It's Kathryn Schulz. Hello, Kathryn.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness. I am so honored to have you. Grateful. I just finished your book this morning.
Thank you for that as well.
Yep. I want to dig into it deeply because it's deeply profound. And I just have to say, as someone who has a literature degree, as someone who loves writing and reading myself, my partner is a English professor. Just the way that you put words together is so beautiful and stunning and surprising. And you know what it evoked is I remember reading Truman Capote's first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, like a decade ago. And I remember being struck by so many passages in that novel. And I had the same reaction to this book, Lost and Found. I just like, there were so many little nuggets that I'm just like, that will live with me for a long time. So thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you. That's such a lovely and generous reaction to the book. And also the first time I think that I've been compared to Truman Capote in any capacity.
Yes. Well, he's one of my favorite writers. And yeah, I mean, again, just profound. I want to dig into it. But before we do that, we always kick off the show with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling, Kathryn?
I'm feeling pretty grand. It's a beautiful late spring day. Actually, it's not technically late spring. I'm here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and it's mid-spring, but acting like late spring. It's our first truly warm day. It's just blue and breezy and lovely outside. And I was shortly before this strolling out among the tulips and daffodils with my little 8-month-old daughter, who always brings me joy. And it's really fun, especially when they're under a year old. Everything is a first thing. So, first daffodils, first tulips, first like truly spring feeling day. And it reconnects me to the things I find marvelous about the world, but occasionally have to be reminded. So it's, I'm good. I'm feeling grateful and content.
That sounds so lovely. And I love that. And this does come up often on the show, how kids can be these portals to reminding us of the awe and wonder of the world when as adults, we can put up so much armor as we navigate the world, right? And kids can be this reminder to soften and listen, right?
Sure. I mean, armor and obliviousness, there's
Sure.
no question some of it is armor, but it's also, we get busy, we get distracted, we're also interested in things like the contents of our cell phones and, our to-do list and tomorrow and the next day and the next month. And kids really take you right straight back to what's happening right now. And that's a real gift.
How's it been just overall as a mom, and what else is it like brought up in you as a human?
Mostly just overwhelming gratitude and joy. I've always wanted kids and came to it rather late. Actually, at a point that I kind of made my peace with the fact that I might never have children or not in the way I expected. There's many ways to bring children into your life and to raise them or help raise them. And I was open to all of those. But this particular little baby, I, watched her get born and put her on her mom's chest and have been along for the whole ride. And the whole ride has been amazing, which isn't to say there haven't also been moments that are exhausting or moments that are just like, what are we doing here? Or like, how do we also have like work lives anymore? I don't want to diminish all the things that are challenging about parenting, but my overall feeling about it, because as you said earlier, it of course is always all the feelings, but by far the dominant one really is just absolute delight. She's incredibly fun.
I love it. I both grieve the fact that my partner Jessica and I don't have kids. Like we were at a point, we're in our early 40s now, and so there was a period of time where we had given it some serious thought and tried for a while, and it just never happened. And I think sort of moving beyond the idea of what that could have been has been a little griefy, right? And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful that this little bundle of joy has brought so much brightness into your world. That's wonderful.
Well, we in turn are very grateful for all of her actual aunts, uncles, and cousins, and vicarious ones. So I know what you mean about the sense of loss of all the kinds of things we foreclose in life, including obviously by having children, you foreclose certain things, namely almost everything about your past life. But that's just by way of saying that I hope that. And I'm confident that alongside whatever sense of loss you have about that, there's just so many ways to be involved in the lives of children. And I can tell you as a new parent, it's really welcome and wonderful to have people who want to be very involved in your child's life.
Yeah, no, for sure. Most of my friends have kiddos and we love them to death. And we're grandparent or godparents to friends' kids and stuff like that, which is delightful. And what struck me, as you were saying that, is this idea that we as humans kind of think about how our lives will turn out, right? So at one point, I thought, oh, we'll have kids, and you start sort of going in your imagination about like what that will look like, right? And then it doesn't turn out that way, and then you have to sort of deal with that. And there's a lot in life like that, right? There's a ton in life like that where we project and we sort of go into the future and think about, oh, what will this be? And that's fun. That's like the imaginative work that we can do as humans, but it also can bring loss and grief and didn't see that coming,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the one hand, I do think I agree with you that those kinds of future projections are wonderful and fun and actually really important. I think there's this wonderful quote by Auden about how humans never become anything without first pretending to be it. I think that's true. I think we have to kind of imagine ourselves into the life that we want. But of course, sometimes that doesn't happen at all. Sometimes in painful ways, sometimes in really delightful and surprising ways. And much of this book is about the kinds of very unexpected turns that life can take, the things that we lose without wanting to and find without meaning to. And those are kind of flip sides of the same coin, which is exactly just the absolute unknowability and to a large degree uncontrollability of life and of our future.
Yeah. So Lost and Found, the book that we mentioned earlier and this beautiful book that you wrote is it's broken up into 3 sections, right? Losing and finding and then the which I love, which spoke directly to my heart as someone who talks endlessly about the importance of the gray and the nuance and the messy and the mushy. I feel like that is the place where true connection and healing and growth happens in the world, in a world where there's so much binary, in the world where you mentioned earlier, like doing and being productive, like capitalism, right? And these systems that sort of want to define us or put us into boxes or what have you, when the reality, it's a lot of letting go. It's a lot of critical thinking and curiosity. And so on that front, and maybe we can work backwards, like what is that, like, what does your and-ness look like to you now? Like after, now, like presently, like after this book came out, obviously you lost your father. I'm very sorry about that. You found C, which is beautiful. You have a child now. What does the and-ness look like to you day in and day out now?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll go back in time first and say, right, I lost my father and found my partner, not exactly at the same time, but in quick succession, actually in the other order. I found my partner and then lost my father. And so I thought a lot about that kind of emotional conjunction, because like you, I think life kind of always works that way. Sometimes it makes it really obvious, as it did for me, but we're always experiencing more than one thing at once and feeling more than one thing at once. And life is presenting us sometimes with really contradictory experiences, but sometimes just with a kind of chaos of experiences that don't even necessarily have anything to do with each other, except that they're happening at the same time and we have to contend with them at the same time. And that to me is the kind of fundamental texture of reality. So it was interesting to get to examine it through this really focused lens of like, well, I've walked you through my thoughts about loss and I've walked you through my thoughts about discovery, but like they actually do not exist in 2 separate sections in the world the way that they do in my book. So let's like now kind of spend some time in them together. All of which is to say, of course, it's still with me, because the whole premise of that section of the book is, it wasn't just that I lost my dad and found my partner and had to contend with all of that at once. It's that's representative of how life functions. So, how is that for me right now? Well, I have a new book and I have a new baby. And I'm proud of this book. It's deeply important to me. It's about 2 of the people I love most in this world. It's as intimate a thing as I've ever written. And yet I have been moved to hear total strangers respond to it with stories of their own life, with the tale of their marriage of 50 years or about losing their own parent. And I'm very moved by the sense of the possibility of something shared across the like wildly different thing that is the human species. And so on the one hand, I want to do right by this book and talk about it and share it with the world. And on the other hand, all I want to do is sit at home with my baby. And that's a very age-old kind of and, especially for women, right? The competing demands on our time, the competing ambitions and hopes, the competing visions of what constitutes a good life. And so that is really present for me all the time right now, and there's a kind of subset of that, which is the funny, specific nature of this moment that we're living through, which is, on the one hand, a global pandemic is a horrible thing. And also I miss human beings, and I love indie bookstores. I love readers. I love getting to go out in public and talk to them and meet them. On the other hand, it's an absolute gift as a new parent to be able to do a lot of things online that you used to have to show up in person for. So that's another kind of and. I'm very grateful to all the people who will decide to spend their evening like staring at their laptop to listen to a conversation about a book. I'm in awe of all of you, and I'm grateful that it means I get to spend more time. Missing fewer bedtimes and being around more for my daughter. But yeah, I miss stores. I miss readers. I'm doing some of that now, which is exciting. But those, I think, are the kind of primary components of the sort of andness of my life right now.
There's so much of it. Like, after reading that section of your book, it just reminded me of how much andness there is everywhere and all of the time, right? Last week I watched, I guess it was less than a week ago, I watched this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Have you heard of it?
No, but it's a great title.
So do yourself a kindness, Kathryn, and see this movie and see it in theaters. It's an independent film by the Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, and it's a multiverse movie, and Michelle Yeoh is the main star in it, and it's so deeply profound message or story about how we are connected, how deeply we feel all the joy and all of the sorrow simultaneously. It's about how we sometimes, and I so related to this piece, feel so overwhelmed that we go to the nothing matters place, and we start to like disassociate, or we start to like disconnect, and the love that sort of can bind that or bring us back. It's like we had to wait 10 minutes before we left the theater because I was just full face, ugly crying. Just a beautiful thing. Anyways, reading your book reminded me of this movie, and it reminded me of really the work that I've been doing these past few years in trying to remind us that we're not like pawns in a war as humans, nor are our emotions, right? Like, these aren't oppositional forces. They are with us always. And what is hard, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this, is like the oppositionalness of like how we face our emotions or how we protect ourselves from certain experiences is so understandable. Like, it's such a human thing. So how do we as humans create more space for that andness to be a true thing, that andness to be a growth opportunity or a perspective bringer or a connector, right?
Yeah, I think it's very hard. I think many forces in life conspire to well, first of all, to make us uncomfortable, even with a single emotion, let alone with the prospect of contending with very different ones, or very different experiences all at once, even though everyone has to do it, right? I feel fortunate every day. I grieved someone, my father, who I loved in a very uncomplicated way. He was a great dad and a great human. And now that I'm a parent, I think all the time about, I hope I can be half the parent to my child he was to me. But a lot of people don't have uncomplicated grief, right? They had very contentious relationships with someone they lost, and very hurtful or difficult ones, or ones around which they have shame or guilt or anger, or you name it. This is an absolutely tragically, but absolutely common reality for many, many, many people. And that's tall order, right? And likewise with love, I feel fortunate in that I sometimes describe myself as kind of emotionally privileged. Life gave me every possible emotional resource to deal with its vicissitudes. I come from an incredibly loving and tender family, and a family that was open and good at communicating. And then I went and I fell in love with someone who's also from a very different, but also very happy and supportive family. And even then, as I am at great pains to say in the book, putting a life together with someone is a complicated thing. It always is. Of course, it is. You're two different people, and you have different feelings and thoughts and reactions and emotions and needs, and you name it, And when you layer on top of that all of the kinds of things that complicate people's lives, love can be absolutely as complicated as grief, or more so. There are, in the same way that countless people are trying to figure out how to grieve someone who hurt them or disappointed them, or in various ways left them contending with a lot more than just sorrow. There are many, many people who love and who want to be loved, for whom love is a fraught and difficult concept, because it's been wielded against them in painful ways, or disguised as things that it isn't. So that's just to say that even within a simple thing, like one category of experience, like grieving or falling in love, it's so manifold, and it's so many things at once. And I think on some level, the beginning, as with all things, is just to honor the nature of the problem, to not try to hide from it, or pretend it's simpler than it is, or other than it is, and let it be complicated. It's so funny. That's a lesson I've learned. This is going to sound kind of banal by comparison, but it's a lesson I learned over and over again as a writer. Like, sometimes your job is to make things incredibly lucid for your readers. But sometimes you can't solve a thing. And sometimes the reason you can't solve it is it's a little bit insolvable. And your job actually is to present the complications and be honest about those. And I feel like that's kind of life too, right? Like, sometimes the job is just to be honest about the complications, and you can't get anywhere. You can't get to the lucid part until you do that. So I guess that's kind of my main feeling, is that it is important to look clearly at the complications that life presents us with. And that's a lot of what I set out to do in this book, both within each of the first two sections, within Lost and within Found, and then above all in that last section, and to try to be honest about the nature of grief and the nature of falling in love, and then the nature of just like grown-up human life, which is, like a lot of things are all happening at once, and to try to kind of walk with readers through those very complicated landscapes, and try to be a kind of tour guide, like point out as many of the relevant features as I could.
Yeah. Oh, you did splendidly. And I love the complicated, the perspective on being complicated. And I think what's important there is the fact that, or the lesson in there for me is this idea that we don't need to have answers all the time, right? We don't need to fix it all the time. So getting comfortable with the discomfort of not having the answer always is a piece of that. At least it's been for me. This thing you said about, you mentioned love and grief and those things being bound to each other. You said in the book about something around sort of this worry that if you stop grieving, you'll sort of lose the connection you had to this person. can you talk a little bit more about that? Because like that's such a that's deeply profound, and it sort of like shook me in a way that brought up some anxiety, even, you know. Can you talk about that piece, or that sort of sentiment?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very easy to be afraid of ceasing to grieve, which isn't because anybody wants to be unhappy or to yearn for something you'll never have again, or to spend their life, you know, tearing their hair and rending their clothes and feeling so bereft. Nobody wants that. But I think that grief often feels like a way of not even just honoring, but inhabiting a connection that is otherwise severed. You know, I think it feels like the last thing we still have that links us to whoever it is that we lost. And it's active and present and dynamic in the way that, like, you know, having your dad's, you know, old wallet, or having your partner's, you know, beloved, you know, gray hoodie, or, you know, having your child, God forbid, your child's, you know, baseball gloves and the whole content of their room. Like, those things are static and they can't change, but the grief is with you and inside of you, and you carry it around. And I think it can feel like the relationship, you know, it's what you have left. Yeah. And so it seems a little terrifying to imagine that someday you won't even have that, you know, and it feels, I think some people can experience it as a failure. Speaking of empathy, a kind of failure of empathy. Like, if that person were here, they would be like, what have you already forgotten about me? You know, I didn't matter so much to you. Or it can feel more public facing, like it somehow feels urgent to remind the world, like, no, this person mattered to me and I was close to them and I loved them and they're gone. And I can't bear for that not to be visible and on everybody's minds, you know, all the time, not just mine. I think it can feel very, very hard to let go of the identity of bereft. And I think that's very natural. And I also think it does no one any good, you know, which isn't to say hurry up and get over it at all. Like, grief has a long and I don't want to say natural course, because it's so variable for everyone. And of course, can be shortened or extended by circumstance in countless ways, but it certainly has a course to run. And I think, you know, we do very ill to try to forestall it or shorten it. But by the same token, we do very ill to try to lengthen it or will it back into being, or force it into the same strength and presence it had at some earlier time. It does not honor the dead. It does not keep them alive. It does not keep them connected to you. In fact, all it really does is keep them very insistently and newly dead, which is not a place in which anyone's memory can truly be honored or lived into.
Interesting. Yeah. So recently I saw that the new DSM-5, the mental health, you know, manual, said something along the lines of like grief having a timeline. And there was a lot of actually pushback and lashing back from sort of the grief community at large, saying that, like, no, that's actually not true. Like, maybe you're simplifying something that's very complicated and, as you said, variable for so many. But what is interesting about that too is, like, I had this conversation with Rabbi Steve Leder, who wrote this beautiful book called The Beauty of What Remains, which I highly recommend. And he said, after losing his father, he said, it won't, like, prior to losing his father, he said, like, oh, it will, I'm forgetting what he said, but after losing his father, he said, it won't, it's not that it will always hurt, it's just that it won't hurt so bad for so long, or something along those lines, right? Like, it will hurt, but it will be less painful over time, right? And maybe that's a piece of the, I mean, the reality is too that we're human, right? And we only have so much we can contain in our brains and remember too, right? Like, you're scientifically minded. Like I lost my best friend Scooby, my dog, my black Labrador, last year in April. It's coming up on a year. And I still see him. I still will, like, we have a couple of new rescues, and I will call his name accidentally, so things like that will happen. But it's slowly, right? It's slowly dissipating. They're not there anymore. They're not in my life day to day. So it's sort of natural to allow that to take its course, and whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly don't think it looks like some, prescribed amount of time via some prescribed number of steps, in the way that grief literature can sometimes suggest. And certainly, the mandate and mission of the DSM is different, I think, from the mandate and the mission of actual mental health professionals. In that it's a diagnostic manual, but of course it's also primarily, let's be honest, an instrument of insurance companies, and it's meant in part to handle and resolve questions of what's billable when and what isn't. So one ought to treat it with a serious quantity of salt. But yeah, I mean, I just think everyone, even if such a thing, and I don't mean to discredit everyone involved, a lot of very compassionate people are trying to be compassionate mental health care providers at every level of that industry. But, even if such a thing could be established in broad stroke, it would, of course, be wildly variable person to person. We are all grieving different people. We are all different people doing the grieving. We are all doing it under different circumstances. We are grieving people who died in very, very different ways. I'm at great pains in this book to describe my father's death as not a tragedy, right? Because it isn't at all. My father died in his 70s, surrounded by people he loved, and after a long and rich and remarkable life. And I think, relatively at peace and relatively not in pain. So, what we would think of as a good death, insofar as you could get close to such a thing. I mean, I wish he'd been 104, not 74, but by and large, a good death. And yet, of course, I found it, despite not being tragic, very, very sad. That was what was interesting to me about it in some ways. This is as close as you could get to a kind of optimal circumstances. And you know what? It still sucks. And that's really interesting, right? Those are the terms of our existence. And somehow we have to contend with, even if it's not worse, it's bad. And how do we live with this kind of inevitability of loss? But the reason I go to such lengths to describe it as not tragic and, as this kind of approximation of a good death is that, of course, people suffer losses vastly harder and less just and more painful than that every hour of every day. Yeah. So the notion that we could somehow impose a reasonable timeline on this it just strikes me as, on the face of it, absurd and unfair to people who are grieving.
Yeah. Yeah. And that last piece is important too. And you say something about this in the book in regards to, by the simple fact that, your father died a not tragic death, and someone over here, had experienced some, far more tragic, quote unquote, death, doesn't take away from the fact that you experience loss and it does suck, right? Like, that's a sort of human comparison thing we do, a game we play that's not very useful.
Very not useful. Yes, I completely agree. Not very useful. In fact, very not useful. That's exactly right. In establishing that my father's death was not a tragedy, what I'm not trying to do is get involved in the comparative suffering game, because that's a real fool's errand. There is always someone luckier than you, more fortunate than you, and there is always someone less fortunate than you. And although I do believe it's really important to be mindful of that, especially and specifically to be mindful of those less fortunate or suffering worse. I believe that because I believe it's an act of compassion to recognize that, and because I do think that some of the time for some of us it can be helpful, right, and restorative to reflect on. Bluntly put, all the suffering we're not experiencing, all the ways we are incredibly fortunate. It's not that I don't think that's important, but it becomes the opposite. It becomes not at all helpful or illuminating when it's rendered sort of prescriptively, like, well, you shouldn't feel X because, so many people have it worse, or, some notion that your suffering doesn't count, your pain doesn't count, your loss doesn't count, simply because we could pony up one that by some metric seems, quote, worse. Well, so what? Pain is pain. And the point is not to be reminded constantly that there's more of it. The point is to join in sorrow over the existence of it and try to help us all feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not to compare, and it's to recognize that my pain is my pain and your pain is your pain, and they're both valid, and those have it better and those have it worse. And being mindful of that can bring a more compassionate, empathetic lens with which we, view the world. You said something in the book that another one of those Capote lines that sort of struck me, which is each of us is obliged to dispel the darkness in the world, which I believe to be true for me. What does that mean for you?
It's as close as I have to you've heard me be a not very prescriptive person on this in this conversation. It's the closest thing I have to a prescription, at least about how to live my own life. Although I do think if you asked me to come up with if I were in the business of providing commandments, which I'm very glad I'm not, it would be on the list. I think that the world is full of suffering, our own and that of other people, and full of pain and full of ignorance, and some of the suffering is inevitable. That's what I'm getting at with this problem of the good death. Even under the best of circumstances, we lose what's very precious to us, and we feel pain, physical, emotional, mental. And I guess my feeling is the very structure of life provides us with enough of that kind of pain that we should never pile on, right? But of course, regrettably, that's what humans do, right? We inflict all kinds of pain and suffering on each other unnecessarily and quite horribly. And I don't know what we are doing here unless it is to try to make someone's life a little better and a little easier. And that is kind of my only moral guidance. It's not enough. The reason life is complicated is, there are always very complicated moral situations where it's unclear, what would alleviate pain the best, or which side of a problem you should be on. But as a broad guideline, yes, my feeling is we are here to make each other's lives easier and kinder and richer and more gentle, not impoverished or painful.
And what does that look like for you? Like, in terms of how you do it? I mean, obviously you do it by writing beautiful memoirs and the gift of writing, but are there other sort of day-to-day things that you like to do to sort of in the realm of trying to dispel the darkness?
Sure. I mean, the blunt answer to that is I do wildly too little. I don't kid myself that writing is sufficient. On a good day, I believe it's a contribution, and not just writing things like this. I actually do think, this book is a departure for me. I don't normally write about my own life. And I do believe that in my normal capacity as a reporter, as a journalist, there are ways to inhabit that job that feel moral to me and that feel like they hopefully help people's lives and do dispel ignorance or address issues. But again, I don't flatter myself that I'm either very good at that or that it's enough. On a very basic level, I tithe. I am not a religious person, but I believe that we're always talking about not throwing money at the problem. My God, I wish we would all throw more money at more problems. Like I do. I just think like the truth is, tragically, we live in an era of radical inequality. There are a lot of problems, especially just simply in the lives of our fellow human beings, that would be enormously alleviated by money. And so I make a habit of giving a lot of mine away. I shouldn't say a lot. I should doubtless give more of it away, but I do give 10% of it away on a conservative year. And again, I'm mindful it's not enough. It's not enough both because it's not enough of my money, and because it's never enough to just throw money at a problem. Although, as I said, I believe it to be a great start. But it's so funny. I'm really mindful of for me, the combination of the pandemic and new parenthood has felt morally very tricky because it has removed me from community in all kinds of ways. I believe in volunteering, but in a deeper sense than that, I believe in being a part of your community. Being among the people who will respond in the face of need, whether it's steady and constant need or sudden and urgent need. You just, you show up, you do whatever it is, you bring the meal, you build the house, whatever. Yeah. And it has been complicated in these last couple of years. I think one of the saddest tolls of the pandemic for me was that we had to regard one another as a danger. And especially, being, my partner was pregnant during the pandemic. Our baby was born during the pandemic. Actually, other people were kind of a danger. And worst of all, in the early period of the pandemic, a quite uncertain danger. No one had much information at the time. Yeah. And all that's just to say, I regret the ways that it separated us from community, because I do think, the other part of Dispelling the Darkness is just fostering community, showing up for people, being active in your town, in your community, in your schools, in your place of worship, whatever it may be for you, or all of the above.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It is, I feel, and I wonder if you can relate, I always feel a little bit overwhelmed by it all. And I don't think I want to rid myself of that feeling of overwhelm, because that means I am sort of leaning into some discomfort and trying to do more and trying to be more active in my community or do more activism or whatever it may look like, right? So, but I also need to be aware as a sensitive person that I can't afford, and the world can't afford to have us shut down either, right? Mm-hmm. Do you feel that?
I mean, for sure, and I think that, yes, I think that impulse to shut down is simultaneously very understandable and very dangerous. But I also think, overwhelmed is such an interesting word, because we're overwhelmed in good ways too, and I think that's important to remember, because it's kind of the reward for staying open in the ways that overwhelm us with the world's need, and the world's suffering, and what can sometimes feel like just the cruelty and illogic of it. But we're overwhelmed sometimes just by the night sky. We're overwhelmed by a baby just reaching up for you. We're overwhelmed by the absolute wonder of being here and getting to witness it all and getting to exist. So I think I try to hold those things in balance. If you want the latter, you got to take the former. That's the price of the ticket.
Yeah, absolutely. It's precisely why I, in my intro, say wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. Mm-hmm. It's all the things. It is awe-inspiring, and it's wildly bonkers and out of our control, right? Yeah. So, you're a runner. Do you still run?
I do, although I'm currently, to my grave annoyance, suffering from an injury. So that has put a real crimp in my running style. But yes, it's not stopping me from identifying as one, because in my deep heart core, that's whether or not I'm out on a trail or the road, that's who I am.
So I also run, and I also love to backpack into the wilderness. And for me, it stems from this sort of childhood wonder of escape and sort of finding new things in the woods and sort of exploring and embodying Calvin and Hobbes and, that kind of thing into the woods. And like, there's something so magical about it that I think for some, it can bring anxiety and it can bring fear, right? Tell me a little bit about your experience in sort of the adventure and wondrous sort of exploration you do as a runner, as a hiker.
It's interesting about fear. I don't feel that, and probably should. I guess that's not quite true. Every once in a while, I've had a moment of real fear in the wilderness, typically in moments when I think I might be lost. Speaking of lost and found, but no, you just heard me talk about being overwhelmed, looking up at the night sky full of stars. I find the natural world just remarkable at every scale. A fern in front of you on the trail, and that entire night sky, and there's no amount of contemplating it that would be too much for me, or even enough for me. So I'm always happy when I have an excuse to be out in it, whether that's, a 30-minute run I'm squeezing in on a day, or, off deep somewhere in the mountains. And I guess it does, what I love about it, it connects me for sure to that sense of awe, and mystery. And good fortune, right? The kind of, wow, like we get to see all this. This is crazy, This is astonishing. And at the same time, I like how, so that's the sort of cosmic scale of it. At the human scale of it, I just like how it sort of orients me in my own body. It's not that I stop thinking, but I think different kinds of thoughts, and I think in different ways, especially when running. For me, at least, the runner's high is a real thing. There's a kind of very meditative state I can enter into while running. I think it's enforced by the terror of spraining an ankle. Because to be honest, when you're out trail running, it's like the trail in front of you is like covered in leaf litter, and there's like roots and rocks and steep parts and, maybe ice or maybe mud. Like, you just have got to focus on it. And there is a kind of, when the front of your mind is that occupied with not spraining your ankle, it's like all the thoughts rush up there and focus on this one thing. And there's this vast clearing behind them where unexpected little things can pop up. So yeah, I love it both for how it orients me in the cosmos and how it orients me in myself.
I love the way you talk. I love the way you speak. I feel all of that. I am deeply humbled by being in nature. I mentioned before, we live in kind of a rural pocket of Southern California, and above me now are this one over here is a 150-year-old oak tree. It's just sort of like, it reaches its hand like out over our house. And it's so, whenever I'm feeling a little bit untethered or anxious, I look up at that tree, and it's everything to me. And on that sort of cosmic level that you talk about, it's weird that it does that, right? It is weird that it does that, that it sort of brings that feeling into me, but it does, and it always has. And it one of the few things I am grateful for in my childhood is that camping was the vacation. We went camping, we went into the woods. And that was, I feel like that was pretty special. And I hold that in my heart to be pretty special. Yeah.
Yeah. What a gift from your family. I love my family very much, and just cherish everything about my childhood. But it did not feature camping trips. I joke that I was kind of raised to be a disembodied bookworm. So which believe me, has its own merits. But yeah, I came to the natural world kind of late and on my own terms. But yeah, what a wonderful gift to put a kid in a sleeping bag somewhere and show him the stars.
Yeah. So as this kid with your nose in a book, what were some of the go-tos as a kid that you loved?
I was a voracious and completely indiscriminate reader as a child, and in a wonderful way. My family felt no need to either constrain or guide my reading. I mean, I suppose my reading was guided in certain ways, in that my dad, in particular, read to us and delighted in doing so. And, would just open the Norton Anthology and read to us. He loved poetry. He took us to see Shakespeare's plays very young. So there was a sense of the kinds of things he cherished and why, and my mom too. But there was this kind of respect for our minds that I really admire. My parents kind of let me loose in the library. They were not very material people, but they never balked when I asked to buy a book, if they took me to a bookstore. So, I read a lot of junk, which frankly, I think is kind of fine. And I read a lot of non-junk, some of it, way too sophisticated for me to understand at the time. But that's the beauty of it. You read Jane Austen or Robert Frost, and you have a very kid level engagement with it. I choose those two authors in particular because actually in a wonderful way, you can engage with them as a kid and they reward that. And then they deepen and deepen as you grow up kind of alongside them. But, as a kid, I mean, my gosh, I fell hard and early under the spell of T.H. White. I read The Once and Future King. Speaking of too young, I mean, my gosh, I read The Once and Future King in elementary school, the whole thing, not just the first third. That's the boy Arthur and Merlin, and the part that's often kind of rendered in childlike ways in popular culture. The sort of Sword in the Stone part. I read the whole thing, and then I didn't read it again until quite recently, actually, until I started my job at the New Yorker. I reread it for a beautiful memoir I was reviewing, Helen Macdonald's H is for Hawk, which is partly about T.H. White, interestingly. And I read it and I thought, man, I mean, children's minds are so weird. I cannot believe that I read this as a child. And I furthermore cannot believe I loved this as a child, or understood it as a child. It's a beautiful book. It's a perfect epic, comedy, romance, tragedy. It really does all three in 3 acts very beautifully. But anyway, that's all to say I kind of went hard in the direction of Arthur knockoffs and Fantasyland as a kid.
Okay.
And that stuff was formative to me. But more to the point, I think I just read. I was always reading something. And I think probably partly as a result, I had a sense from very young of, boy, what an amazing thing to get to do. And I want to do this thing. As it turns out, I was a little bit wrong. I'm hopelessly bad at fiction. As a kid, I thought I'd write fiction because kids mostly read fiction. But it's certainly, it was a very fun world to live in. And I think ultimately very good for my mind.
Well, reading is empathy, right? Stories, movies are empathy machines. As Roger Ebert said, stories are the same, books are the same, right? It allows us to see ourselves in the characters, It's a beautiful exercise. Yeah. Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have fond memories of wandering the public library as a kid and mother saying, you get 5 books, you can check out 5 books today. Right. And just, finding the 5, it felt very special. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of finding, right. Yeah. It's a wonderful kind of treasure hunt. You go off through the library. And
absolutely.
Build your stack right.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about, Kathryn, is, so I reread, because I think I read it when it came out, your article in The Atlantic, the one about the big one.
Oh, the New Yorker. Gotcha.
The New Yorker. Sorry. The New Yorker.
That's good.
Oh, how dare I mention The Atlantic? Wow, what a monster.
Well, I had a moment of have I written, you do at various points in your life freelance a lot. And I thought, have I written for The Atlantic? It's possible. I joke now that I used to have a memory and now I have a child. So it's possible I wrote for The Atlantic. But
yeah, well, I have the memory of a goldfish. So, we're on that level together. So just amazing piece of writing and such a overwhelmingly richly detailed scientific thing that's happening in the world, and trying to relate such a thing, or trying to describe it on such a human level to relate to help people understand that, like, this thing is serious. After rereading it, it left me feeling anxious. It certainly left me feeling like, okay, I have this information. What do I do with it now? I don't know. How are you feeling about it now?
It's an interesting question. Well, in some ways, I mean, look, as a piece of writing, it was just beginning to end incredibly interesting for me. I just said I'm not normally a memoirist. I normally work as a reporter and or as a critic. Actually, more often as a critic. So it's wonderful to work as a reporter. The world gives you lots of information, and it's your job to kind of sort through it and put it together in a way that's meaningful for readers. And in the case of that piece, per our earlier discussion about how do you dispel the darkness, it actually did quite plainly feel like a very urgent subject, and I thought, well, maybe getting some attention for this story will make some kind of difference. And as with these things, on the good side, I think it did. On the bad side, it's never enough. So, from my perspective, you write a piece like read it and bolt their homes to their foundations, that could be some kid's life, which means, of course, their family's life, and their future happiness. In the case of that, that article made a splash for reasons that go far beyond me and don't really have anything to do with its caliber, me as a writer, but I'm grateful that it happened. And there were some really positive outcomes, funding for an earthquake early warning system for the Northwest finally. But to my mind, the most positive outcome of all. And I certainly cannot, I don't want to take any more than the tiniest morsel of credit for this, but there's a school system in that piece. They show up at the very end. Yeah. It's in the town of Seaside, Oregon, where truly the elementary schools were real death traps. I mean, they were in the tsunami inundation zone, and there was literally no plan to get out. You couldn't get a school full of elementary school kids out of them between the time when an earthquake happened and the tsunami followed. And for decades, the superintendent of that school system had been trying to raise the funds to move those schools. And, election cycle after election cycle, the bond measure failed. And finally, in the election cycle after that article came out, it passed. And in fact, they're building an enormous new campus way up in the hills. All those schools, elementary, middle, and high, will all be out of the reach of the tsunami. And so again, was that me? No, it was an incredibly dogged, hardworking superintendent and a lot of other people in that school system trying fiercely to protect their kids in the same way that, wasn't me beating the drum about that story. I mean, long before I got there, a bunch of regional reporters had tried their hearts out to get the word out about it. So it's always a lot of people, and it's always a tipping point. But I do feel like some real palpable material good came of that, which quite frankly, as a journalist, you barely ever get to say. So I'm pleased about that. I don't know. It's so funny. I'm actually just in a couple of weeks, I'm heading out to the Northwest for this book tour. I've got some live in-person events in Eugene and Portland and Seattle. And it's interesting. I am known there. I'm both better known there and known in a different way than I probably am in the whole rest of the country. So, check in with me in a month. I might have different feelings about how that piece has aged. But overall, I feel like it did function as a kind of wake up call. And as I said, even if it saves literally one life, it's more than I can say for most of the things I write. Yeah,
no, that's fair. Everyone listening, I think you should read it, especially those on the, in the Pacific Northwest area for sure. So I'll link it in the show notes. Okay, Kathryn, let's talk about empathy heroes. This is how we kind of wrap up the show. My guest and I talk about someone in our lives who is empathetic, compassionate, feely, whatever someone who is an empathy hero. I will go first to give you a moment to reflect on your empathy hero. My empathy hero this week is the actor, writer, all-around geek, Will Wheaton. Will is someone I just had on the show. Actually, as of this recording, his episode came out yesterday, and I originally reached out to his people in January of 2019, and then more than 3 years later, we made it happen. And he wrote this book called Still Just a Geek, which is he wrote a book in 2004 called Just a Geek, and this new book is a reflection on that book through annotation. And I called it the inception of inner child work, because it's like he went through it and sort of compassionately reflected on who he was then in a way that's like really vulnerable and special. And I really connected with, because he experienced a great deal of childhood trauma and held a lot of shame around it. And felt like he acted out, as a teenager on sets and whatnot. Anyways, it's a really stunning book and a deeply empathetic book, and just grateful for it and Will. So Will Wheaton is my empathy hero this week. How about you?
Well, that's beautiful, but I didn't need even 1 second to answer that question. For sure, my answer is my mother. This book, Lost and Found, is primarily about my father and my partner, two incredible people who I love and I loved getting to write about. But in the case of my father, I was writing about him, of course, because I was writing about his death and my grief over his loss. And it's an unfortunate thing we do. We eulogize the dead, but we sometimes forget to praise the living. So, my mother takes a kind of a back seat in this book in a certain sense, which she would be very comfortable with. And of course, she read the book at every stage and has been a wonderful champion of it. But, my father was this big, gregarious, brilliant man who would tell you without hesitating that the best thing that ever happened to him was marrying my mom. And quite adorably, he just always felt she was the most beautiful woman in every room and the greatest catch of his life. And he was right. They were a wonderful pair. And my mom, who largely goes unsung in the book, except for a few small and I hope very loving cameos. My mom actually is kind of an empathy genius. She is just unfailingly compassionate, and without being a Pollyanna, looks for the best in people and brings out the best in people. And is also just very emotionally astute. She can see through to the heart of why a thing is happening. Like you might see the surface irritation, or the anger or the frustration, or the disappearing act or whatever it may be. And she sees the kind of deep emotional truth and why someone is acting the way they are, and therefore how best to react. My mom is a genius that way, and my sister really inherited that. She's truly, like my mother, one of the wisest and most compassionate and patient people I know, and I'm just boundlessly grateful to and in awe of both of them.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Kathryn, where can the listeners out there connect with you? Obviously, order your book, etc.
Well, I can be tracked down pretty easily through a website, which is just my full name, Kathryn Schulz, mildly impossible to spell. But if you throw in the very easy to spell New Yorker, it will turn me up, or the name of the book, Lost and Found, which is pretty straightforward. The book, you can get it absolutely anywhere, but I really encourage you, if you want to read it, and I hope you do, to track it down at your local independent bookstore, which makes careers like mine possible and makes communities like the ones I think we all love living in possible and thriving. So yes, I would love it if you would pick up a copy of the book at whichever indie you like best. Yeah,
and listeners, if you don't have an independent bookstore near you, bookshop.org is a great resource that they support local bookshops that I love. And so I'll make sure to include a link to the book in the show notes. And yeah, Kathryn, thank you so much for doing this. I felt a little wandering and wayward in my words, so apologies for that, but I really appreciate you and just cherish your book. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. To my mind, wandering conversations are some of the best that there are. And this has been absolutely my pleasure. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring, pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.